Today is March the 2nd, 1974. Betty Jo DeMura and I, Mary Bilby, are sitting here with Grandma Babbitt, and she's going to put on tape some of her remembrances about her early life, in fact, her whole life, I hope. From the day, the earliest you can remember till last Saturday, you were 80 years old.
I remember, the first I can remember of me, I thought I was a very plain child. I thought I was even kind of the ugly duckling, because I had an older sister whose hair was curly, and she could sing. And she was usually dressed up in a little white pinafore, and was always kind of the little show off for company, and I was more well, I was kind of a tomboy. I was always playing with my brothers instead of my sister, and I thought of me as a very plain child. I just had pigtails and brown eyes, and my hair was a little bit on the blonde. I thought of her as being the pretty brunette, and I was the plain little blonde. Well, you know, your hair was very good. Your hair was good. But I was usually standing on the sidelines while she was introduced to guests, and she was sort of a company child, and I was not exactly the little Cinderella, because it bothered me not at all. I had a very independent sort of nature. I sort of lived in my own little world. People never annoyed me, never bothered me at all, and I never felt competitive with her in any sense of the word.
How many?
Never did.
There were three in your family?
There was. I had one older sister, Lorena, one older brother, Lester, and one younger brother, Bill. And then later, in later years, I had a stepbrother, Alvin Shuley. But I'm thinking of how I remember me in the as just the kind of a child I was. I was very independent.
That you're talking about.
And we lived in Mesa, just across the big canal from my grandfather Passey's farm. This was it was a small farm, and most of my childhood was spent back and forth at my grandfather Passey's home across the canal.
Did your father, did he farm?
No, my father never farmed. He was of the Passey family. There was a whole big family of Passey boys. As I remember, they had about 3 sisters, and I don't know exactly how many, 6 or 7 brothers. Well, you probably do. I've just never, thought about how many. But my father was sort of considered the dude of the family, and he was always dressed up, and he had black curly hair, and he was forever dressed up in his nice clothes, and he was usually, to me, as I grew up, my father was just kind of an occasional visitor at the house, and he owned some race horses that he would travel with these horses, and he had a younger brother who was sort of small, undersized, and he used him as a jockey, trained him as a jockey, and they traveled. Commodore Cassie, and they traveled with the race horses and went, from town to town and event to event, and he was usually gone. I don't remember him ever being a domestic figure, coming home and being a father to us, and he was just a kind of an occasional visitor, and my mother worked very, very hard doing anything she could besides taking care of us as four children.
Where in the world did 2 different people like that? Very quiet, industrious person.
Well, they all belonged to the early pioneer families who homesteaded in the Salt River Valley.
Was your father Mormon?
Oh, yes. Evidently, I don't know just where the Passeys, maybe you know where they joined the Mormon church. I think they all came down from the Utah area and there. I don't really know this for sure, but I think they all came down into there when this country was opened up for homesteading, and homesteading there.
What was your mother like? I can remember vaguely.
Well, my mother was a very gentle, very honest woman. She always reminded me an awful lot of Irma Watson. There's even Irma and Irma's sisters always kind of looked like my mother did. I don't know. There's a very strong resemblance there. I don't suppose I've ever said this to Irma. But she was this type of woman, very, very sincere, very industrious, and a good worker, like in the church organizations, like the Aid Society, they called it, and the Young People's Mutual Improvement Association. I mean, doing her share and always volunteering and things like this for community services as best she could, but with 4 children and all. And eventually, my mother would do sewing. She used to launder men's shirts, even real special things for them, and men that were in public office and things like that, and they'd bring her clothes to mend and launder. Even she did anything she could do in the home. When I was 4 years old and our house burned to the ground, one of the big losses that grieved my mother so was her sewing machine, because it was a big loss, because sewing machines in those days was a sort of a premium. It was real special if you owned a sewing machine. And she, as I remember growing up, my mother made she made even the boys' shirts, but she made our little dresses. She always had a certain nice little crisp little style. We had little perky sashes and ruffles and pinafores and little embroidery yokes, and we always had crisp, fresh, individually designed, kind of special little dresses. At least I always felt very special when I was dressed up. But I considered myself more or less a very, very plain child. And it didn't bother me because I wasn't particularly pretty and attractive. I didn't aspire to such things. But I could play marbles and mumbly peg and compete with my brothers in racing and ball. We played ball, and these were all my
what was that story
occupations.
You about your brothers to wash your dishes?
Yeah. Well, we living on the bank of the canal, there were some big fig trees along there, and we made it a point of building tree houses in the big fig trees. And in the summertime, when it was warm, we'd just swing on a limb and drop down, take a dip in the canal, and swim a while, and then just dry off sitting up on a limb. Most of my activities as a young child was practically spent in trees. If you couldn't find me, I was always in a tree somewhere. And I remember feeling quite aloof from other children. I didn't depend on them for companionship or anything like that, and I was active, but I felt very much apart from them. Not I never had real close chums. I lived kind of an independent
Where did you go?
existence.
Where'd you go to school?
Well, no, you asked me something else a minute ago.
Oh, I was asking you about
How you
playing
got the
marbles.
boys?
Yes. Well, through this was through the years. We played lots of marbles. We played for keeps. We had a collection of special agates with pretty markings on them, and all of these. And these prize marbles that I would win, I kept in a jar, and they were practically money as far as they were for trade and all this sort of thing, and agates and flints, and I had such a collection that I would win from all the boys that I played marbles with. that it would be sort of a, what do you call it, money exchange?
Barter?
Barter material, yes. And very often I would induce, especially in later years when this collection was really a collection, and my brothers were younger, Alvin and Bill, I would bribe them with marbles to, wash the dishes. After we lived on Grandpa Shirley's farm, we had milk cows, and we had, there would be, in the town, there was a milk wagon that would come around and pick up your milk cans with your fresh milk in the mornings, take it to the creamery, where it was sold, and then your milk cans were brought back, and they were never washed. This was my special duty, to wash the milk cans, and they had to be washed immediately, or they would sour, and then that would sour the next day's milk if the milk cans weren't real clean, and so this had to be done. So this was one of my unpleasant duties in a way. I didn't mind it too much, except that I wanted to do it at my convenience rather than at the time that it needed to be done. So this is one of the things I would bribe them with the marbles to wash the milk cans.
Not exactly bribe, but pay them.
Pay them off in marbles to get the job done. As I grew up, I more or less grew up with my brothers rather than with my sister. They were my companions, and I competed not only in their sports and their play and their other activities. For instance, I was a source of pride that I could milk a cow like the boys could. My sister never learned to milk a cow.
Well, you were a little bitty girl, weren't you?
Yes, I was a little undersized. I grew very slowly. And later, I think they decided it was because my tonsils were bad. And it sort of, really thwarted my growth. It was slow until after I was about 12, 14 years old, I had my tonsils out. In those days, they thought you needed your tonsils. They never removed tonsils for so many years. After that, I began to grow a little more rapidly, but I did grow very slowly.
Haven't had anything to do.
I was 4 years old when the house when the house burned down, and we lived. The railroad went through the part of the farm. And we always felt that it was sparks from the railroad that set the house on fire. There was no other excuse.
Could it have lighted grass?
No, it wasn't grass. It started on the roof. The fire started on the roof, and this was the time. The thing that I remember, it was a terrible loss.
Did it burn completely down?
Yes, it burned to the ground with hardly anything saved. There was no way to fight the fire. I mean, no hoses or running water. The water, we dipped up from the canal water in barrels and caught rainwater for house supplies and water.
And now you were going to tell about the puppies?
Yes. The grievous loss that just broke my heart was that we had 4 little puppies who had been born under the back porch where the mother had made her way under there and crawled under and had her little puppies under there, and when they were burning, the puppies were too young to get out, and the mother was crying, and I crawled under the porch to get the puppies, and one of the men trying to fight the fire grabbed me by the hind leg. He dragged me out and he spanked me until I can feel it yet. I never in my life have I felt the impact that he gave me, and naturally I didn't dare. Of course, my life would have been in danger. The thing could have collapsed on me, and if I'd gotten clear under there where the puppies were. So I ran into the alfalfa field and threw myself down in the alfalfa and sobbed my heart out and tried not to listen to the puppies
You must
crying.
have lost everything. The whole family must have lost everything but the clothes they had on, really.
We did. We did. They took up collections downtown to help us. I have in my mother's handwriting, I have a list of people who made donations to us that she always kept. I have it here. It's here.
What
happened after
I don't know. The sequence. The next thing I remember. I don't remember sequence of events in there.
You don't.
But we moved. My mother married Mr. Shuley. As far as when the fire concerned, I don't remember if my father was even around. I know he was at the time, and I was 4 years old. And when my mother married Mr. Shuley, who had a grape vineyard adjoining ours. He had many acres of grapes there, and he married my mother and raised us 4 children.
Well, before you go too far, tell us about it.
Grandpa Shuley, when he was 17 years old, living in Germany, in those days, every German boy was required to join the army, to serve in the army, and as soon as they were 17. And he had an uncle, a bachelor uncle, who was living in California and raising grapes around Anaheim in that area. And he was considered quite wealthy, and the family were anxious for some of the family to come and inherit his farm and some of his wealth over there, and he being a bachelor. And so Martin Shuley was selected in the family to go live with his uncle. But he proved to be such an old sourpuss and so hard to live with and such a crank for a young boy that Grandpa finally told him to take his farm and keep it, and he just pulled out for Arizona, went on his own. These were the days when all of this area was opened up to homesteaders. And first he worked for years with a family by the name of Cuber in Mesa, who had a winery. And in California, he had worked quite a bit with wineries with the grapes that were raised there. And so he lived with the Cubers in Mesa and worked in their winery for several years. And he finally was known as an expert with grapes. And he finally acquired some acreage, planted a vineyard of his own, but instead of making wine, he made raisins. He raised top of seedless grapes. And so his farm was right next to the Passy farm, the little acreage that we just owned, a few acres that my father lived on, never farmed. I think that Mr. Shuley used to pasture some of his cows on part of our land. As I remember, it was adjoining, and anyway, we didn't have any grapes on our farm. We didn't have anything, but we had a milk cow, and this is as I remember it. So he was our neighbor, and then he married my mother and took us 4 children there to live. I'm sure that he, through the years of him living there, that he admired her integrity and sympathized with the plight that she was having to raise 4 children by herself.
Now, this was not the farm that we remember. This was in Mesa.
This is what is North Evergreen and Mesa now. It was made into a subdivision. In fact, they bought the Shuley farm. Was bought by subdividers, and it's a residential area in Mesa now. Some of our big old fig trees are still there on the bank.
Is it North Evergreen?
Yes, it's North Evergreen. It's what it's called, North Evergreen. It's what they named the subdivision. And at that time, then Grab Shuley, in the meantime, he and one of my mother's brothers, Bill Peterson, homesteaded a section of land between Mesa and Chandler, And then to prove up on that land, you had to go each year and make a certain evaluation of improvements on the land, like putting in canals, and raising crops, and you had to make a record of the crops that you raised, and after a number of years in proving up, when you made claim to this as a homestead, then they called it proving up on the land, you'd have to make use of it for a number of years, and finally it was deeded to you by the government. And so this is how the Chandler Ranch came into being. And then after they proved up, they jointly took a whole section of land, 160 acres, and then they split up 80 acres a piece, you see. And then later, through the years, why the Shuley farm was extended, they bought some neighbor acreage until there's about 320 acres, I think, out there altogether that constituted the Shuley farm. I went to Mesa Public School, and I went to school when I was 5 years old, and I don't ever remember learning to read or write. I must have learned it from my older brother and sister as they went to school. I must have just picked it up from them because I could read and write before I was sent to first grade, and they didn't know what to do with me. In first grade, I was 5 years old, and I could read and write as well as the third graders, and I didn't feel out of place at all, but they must have felt that I was kind of a problem because they kept pushing me on, in the upper grades. And I remember the first day I went to school. We had little slates that were supplied. We didn't own our slates, but the school supplied little slates, little slate pencils, and Mrs. Loper was the teacher, who was the wife of the school superintendent. He was in later years he was superintendent of the feeding schools. Years later, when I became a teacher, he came over and observed me one day teaching. But anyway, Mrs. Loper wrote "cat" on the blackboard. And on our slates, we were supposed to write C-A-T, and then she'd come around and see what we could do with it. And by the time she got around to me, on both sides of my slate, I had written cat, 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 cat on both sides, and everybody else was, didn't know how to go about it, So I attracted attention from the very first thing, and I was kind of a little runt, sort of, little, and so I think they always thought I was a little smarter than I was because I was always the littlest one in the class. But I was also kind of a show-off in a quiet sort of way because, like in spelling bees and any activities in school, especially if it was competitive, I sort of liked to compete. We had a big laugh in the school one day. This county school superintendent used to come around for a visit, and he was a round, fat, jolly man, laughing a lot, and he enjoyed telling little tales to the children, getting us all to laugh. And I was in third grade, and he came in for a visit one morning, and just for a little bit of sport, he began having us spell words, and he'd point at you with his finger and say the word like this, and you were supposed to spell it back, but he would kind of startle you, just for the spectacular performance. He was kind of show off, and so I was sitting in the front row, and very much alert, to everything he was going to do. And to me, he said, "Fox!" And I jumped up with my finger and "Fox!" I said, right back at him, which threw the whole class into hysterics. I was kept spelling it. I came right back at him, so we all had a good laugh. Then I can remember also in the third grade of competing in an arithmetic contest. It was great to have spelling bees, and I used to spell them down. I was a real good fast, quick speller, and this arithmetic competition, two of us captains, I was a captain on one, we'd choose sides from the whole class, and we would write, the timetables and things like this, or any quick problems, and whatever. Each one, now beginning with the captains, we would compete on opposite blackboards with our backs to each other. And we would compete until, one side would win, and then you'd have to sit down, and the next one on your team would take your place. But this afternoon, nobody, I was the captain, and nobody on my side got to compete. I downed the whole other side. I worked up a little system when they have us write the timetables, because I'd write really fast, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then times, and then 4,
Sure, it's faster than
yes, and boy, I could get through, ahead of them, because I sort of made a little system out of writing. And then I remember thinking that the teacher used the wrong word, and she said that I had done a very heroic thing, and I thought that wasn't the right word, that I wasn't done. I thought heroic, that wasn't anything, didn't take any heroics, and I thought, well, she could have called me something better than a hero. My mother read to us.
Was she an educated? Had she had some schooling?
No, she hadn't gone. I don't think even through grammar school.
She learned to read and educate herself.
But she realized the value of reading to us children. I mean, this was one of our recreations that Mother would read to us. But she didn't have the advantages of school, because in the early days, when those Mormon people came in, you see, my grandfather had two families. He had another wife, and she was the younger wife, and she was more or less the underprivileged. But I learned through the years that my grandmother Peterson brought more culture to the Peterson family than the other wife. Anything about her.
She brought more culture.
Grandmother Peterson Grandmother Peterson was 16 years old, and lived when she was 16 years old in England. She met up with evidently some Mormon missionaries, and I think besides being perfectly willing to come over with missionaries, that everybody wanted any excuse and any chance to come to the United States. You know how it was with that. The grandmother was only 16, and she worked, as I remember her telling me, she worked in a thread factory there. But grandmother was a very high-class little character. She really brought more culture to the family than any of the other than any of the rest of the Peterson family, and she was very meticulous, and she was quite I think she prided herself on her family discipline. My mother says that when they were being punished, if grandmother took a piece of thread and put it around their wrist and tied it to a chair, they never broke it. They were tied up for the day. Yes, she did have quite an English accent. But there were many handicrafts.
Wait a minute. What about her handicraft?
Well, I had it down. Down was off, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Grandmother had many handicrafts. She sewed a great deal. In fact, the early years when she was married, the family, she made their clothes by hand because she didn't have a sewing machine. And then she made rugs, and she did beautiful colored embroidery on linens, flowers, violets, and everything.